I had been in a meeting where we were talking about nearsightedness because I'm co-chairing a committee for the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And I said, write me a song about, write me some lyrics about myopia. And 2 seconds later, ChatGPT had an entire song with intro, outgo, bridge, chorus, and everything. And so I don't think it's going to be a #1 hit anytime soon. And I don't think anybody who writes lyrics for real, his job is quite at stake yet. But it is interesting to see how you get this interesting mix of academic topics and creativity and AI and how it can come together. Probably by now, just about everyone knows Anil. That's my background. I'm going to give a little bit of background on Ira and Danielle, and then let them also introduce themselves. If you go to Ira's webpage, you see the term post-computational practice. And I think that's an interesting term to use. His practice includes drawing, computation, and painting, generative and emergent process, and has an expertise in creative coding and computational art. And I'll let Ira give more of an introduction of himself, although also interesting, on his LinkedIn page identifies himself as playing and coaching ice hockey. And while I've never been an ice hockey player, I have a son who just finished 14 years of youth ice hockey, so a great appreciation for people who put in the time coaching. And Danielle, when I first saw that she was in Western Massachusetts, heard her story a few minutes ago about having moved from Brooklyn, but enjoyed my own trip to the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art a few years ago, and so familiar with some of the art in Western Massachusetts. But Danielle is an artist, collector, writer, and curator, studied studio art and art history at Harvard, working primarily in photography, film, and mixed media. So lots of technology there. And recent work using AI technology to explore alternative art histories and timelines, experiment with memory and the duality of self, and investigate capitalist and art historical ideals of beauty and femininity. And particularly thinking about capitalism in art makes me think of my first teaching of business ethics, where I tried to inspire students to think about artistic images representing business and ethics as part of the introduction to each of the 8 sessions of the class. So again, I'm going to let everybody give a little introduction to themselves, and then we'll get into the questions for a guided discussion about AI and creativity. So why don't I turn to Ira first?
Well, thanks for having me. Everybody can hear me okay? And I am a little under the weather, so forgive me if I'm a little bit nasally. Yeah, I guess the one thing in my bio that wasn't maybe discussed is that I've been a long-term academic. So I've basically made my career in the academy, in art departments, in computer science departments, and often in between, sort of in that sort of hybrid space, which is another whole other area of interesting discussion at some point, if people are interested in this hybrid space in universities. My practice has been, it hasn't been fully integrated in terms of drawing, painting, coding, and AI. That's sort of, I feel like, the next hopefully 25, 30 years of my goals are to integrate these practices. They've been sort of somewhat, at times they've been kind of pretty isolated. Other times they've overlapped. There's been moments of merging, but that's sort of been a long-term ambition, is how these things can come together for me. Yeah, just interest. This is also an interesting panel just because of the connection into business, to spirituality, other areas that, you know, as if the AI and the art and the coding and painting weren't enough. I love adding more diversity to it. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. And certainly in our discussions of management, spirituality, and religion, we take a very broad view of spirituality, just, you know, with the very broadest being caring about things other than ourselves. And obviously there's all different directions to take that, but recognizing that we're part of a much bigger whole. And with that, we'll turn to Danielle.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to join you all, and Ira, who I'm a longtime fan and now friend of, which we might touch on later, how we've been kind of working together in his new company. I think you did a great job with my background. The sort of one aspect that you didn't touch on is I also have an MBA from Yale. I worked on Wall Street for a number of years, and my career in the arts has always been sort of behind the scenes, finance, operations, that kind of stuff. So I worked at the Museum of Modern Art for nearly a decade in New York City, managing the painting and sculpture department. And then I spent about a year managing a big gallery in Chelsea when the pandemic hit, and I left. Homeschooled my kids for a while until they could go back to real school. And then I got a job, which is my current sort of day job, as the CFO and COO of a Web3 company that runs an online magazine about digital art, essentially, called Right Click Save. And also we make software for collectors of digital art. And through that is sort of how I started working with AI. Prior to that, I was very analog. My photography was with a camera and film. I didn't even really get too much into digital photography other than for snapshots of my children. And I sort of, found AI in the early sort of beta days of Midjourney, which is a popular AI program, and just fell down the rabbit hole and have been working with it ever since. And I do incorporate some of my actual photography into AI as well. Yeah, that's sort of how and also through that world, I've been curating and writing about digital art as well, AI and code-based and all kinds of basically digital art. So, yeah.
Thanks. And Anil, anything, I realize you've been moderating throughout the day and probably done multiple introductions, but anything you want to add to this particular topic for people to know about?
Yeah, no, I think that this whole post-computational is a good term, and hybrid is another good term. And sort of my own passion areas are leader technology and Vedas. So I'm grateful to be at the university which tolerates everything, because otherwise in many universities I've heard they have to play down this part or that part, look reasonable or fashionable, whatever in the department. So I'm kind of having a ball. I've written 16 books, and last 10 years, my creativity really flourished. And my book on data analytics became global #1, by Coursera, by UT Austin, by UNC Chapel Hill, everybody's University of Minnesota, Irvine, all these people list as #1. And just the way it was written creatively. So I'm very much into creativity. And once I learned that creative thinking is a valid way of thinking. And can you believe it, for 50 plus years, I had no idea. I thought analytical thinking, I'm an MBA, top school, all that stuff, that just you have to analyze, PhD, it's the same way. So that discovery just completely changed me. And then I'll just share a little bit about how sort of this notion of incubation, sort of that whole magical process within, that is the magic sauce. And, when you meditate a lot, as we do at this university, that helps unleash creativity and joy together. So A, you do a lot of work. B, you don't feel it's work. C, you feel blissful. And D, you get a lot of work done. And so it is amazing how, for me, just meditation is the single blunt instrument that changes you from feeling bounded to completely unbounded, blissful, and productive and joyful.
Great. Well, thank you. So we've all used the term creativity, but I think it's interesting just to begin by exploring, what does creativity mean to each of us, either as something that we teach, something that we try to inspire in others, or something that we're doing for ourselves. My creativity comes out through my poetry writing. I don't always rely on ChatGPT to write lyrics, and so I have a bit of creativity there, and it's casual as opposed to a part of what really fuels my day-to-day existence. But it is interesting to think about what creativity means, especially as we then move into discussing how artificial intelligence helps or hinders in that process. But I'll throw that out to any of the three of you to just sort of take a stab at what creativity means to you.
I'll start, I guess, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, creativity has always been a part of my life. That said, for a long time, because I was so focused on my career and, having a sort of stable life, I wasn't really a practicing artist for a long time. I took a sort of long break out of, I guess, necessity and sort of lack of mind space, time, physical space. But it was always sort of brewing and is always there. And the fact that I was always surrounded by art and artists and curators, I think sort of got me through, even though I wasn't making work for much of that time. And then, you know, to my great surprise in my, you know, midlife, I've had this sort of creative rebirth because of AI, honestly. You know, I don't think have started, you know, really making work seriously again without it as a tool. The fact that I can do it from anywhere, the fact that I don't need a whole setup in my house, that, you know, between doing tasks and dealing with my kids and dealing with my day job, I can, you know, chip away at projects that I'm working on without having to worry that they're gonna, you know, I don't know, destroy my darkroom or, you know, mess up the painting that's in progress in the corner. Has been so freeing. And yeah, it's something that now I really sort of rely on for sort of emotional and mental wellness in a way, whether or not, you know, it's something that I could make a living on, or, you know, whether my work sells or has collectors. I mean, that's obviously a nice thing, but it's more at this point just part of like my day-to-day, I don't know, self-care in a way, and creativity.
That's really interesting to hear about the self-care and the creativity. Again, my poetry writing is casual, but a lot of it is inspired by when I go for runs with my running partners. And it's a reflection after the run that I then share with the running partner and occasionally with other people. But as part of that self-care and that ability to connect, it's really critical. And not that it's a real use of AI, but certainly being able to look up rhymes quickly to, you know, some unusual things I need to rhyme occasionally is a very interesting, you know, use of technology to help with my creativity. Ira, how about you? What do you think of for a definition of creativity for yourself?
So when I switched from painting, drawing to coding, and switched is maybe not the right word, but when I started trying to apply creative practice towards coding, and I did not come from a formal computer science background, that was probably a good thing. I kept thinking of this metaphor of trying to figure out ways to have the code drip, right? I understood that literal figurative idea of flow, like we talked about meditation in terms of painting and drawing, where I'm looking at a motif, I'm creating some art, something's happening sort of in that space between the motif and the canvas. And it's a generative type of space, and I respond. And I can either be, you know, very responsive and sort of just be in the moment. I can have an agenda. I mean, there's lots of there's a continuum along that sort of generative space. And so when I first started coding, I thought about how do I apply that metaphor to coding, because it seemed like a very deterministic, rigid type of structure. And then fast forward 30 years of coding and AI and stuff like that, I now think about the generative algorithms, sort of what's happening sort of in computing when I draw and paint, right? So, and I think a lot about how what's happening in AI now is a very natural extension of what's happened in this area of creative coding, which was, again, very much informed through this type of creative practice with analog physical materials. So it's a kind of a circuitous answer to a circuitous question, I guess. But that's, so for me, it's very much, if I had to, you know, boil it down to some terms, it would be generative emergence, right? That's what it all comes down to me.
That's very interesting to think about it and think about how things do emerge. And we'll probably come back to that a little bit later on. But Anil, what about you? What's your definition of creativity?
First of all, I'm aware I'm sitting with two professional artists, so it's very presumptuous of me to say anything definitional. But it is, you know, at some technical level, it's kind of producing something novel and useful. But I in my research on creativity, it mirrors the three-part model of consciousness. Is a knower, the process of knowing, and the known. Because creativity also can be assigned to the person, creative process, and the creative product. In fact, I would say creativity can also be assigned to a place. And some of my research has been around consciousness-based architecture. In fact, that paper got accepted, was voted last year's most innovative paper in JMSR, for which I'll receive an award like next week in Boston. So that was a very big surprise. But, you know, creativity is everything at some level. I would say that's the essence of life, wanting to express itself, and just our getting our sort of the whatever thing out of the way, just helping our natural self, becoming a kid again, right? Kids are naturally creative, and that is, to me, is creativity. So I could go on, but I'm just cognizant that we've got great artists in front of us, and let's hear them first.
Well, and it's interesting to hear how you started by saying, in the presence of two artists, where do you or I, for that matter, have any right to talk about creativity? But it's the interpretation of creativity, and I like the way that you concluded by talking about, it allows us to become a kid again, and it allows us to not feel constrained in ways that, really I associate with what it means to be creative, because you've got to go beyond constraints in order to come up with something that is truly novel. I know I wanted to ask about, how each of you uses AI to enable yourself to become more creative. And I know, Danielle, you've already touched on that a bit, particularly in terms of talking about how it goes beyond the physical constraints and not needing to worry about things in the same way as you're producing them. But, was there one particular thing about AI that really drew you back into becoming to putting your art into practice again when you first re-engaged?
Yeah, so the first sort of series I started working on when I was introduced to these AI models, I love art history, I studied it, and I also worked, in art history in progress, working at MoMA in New York. And so I started I thought it would be interesting to see what it would be like to pair different artists, sometimes, traditional visual artists, but sometimes filmmakers or fashion designers, just different types of creatives, using this AI technology, and see what would it be like if they collaborated together, right? Like impossible art histories, different alternate art histories. A lot of these people didn't live at the same time, or if they did, they never would have worked together. So I just found that a really interesting way in for me because of my interest in art history and my love of so many of these different artists, that I started experimenting with using these tools and trying to figure out how these tools work. It's expanded a lot. I do a lot of different things now, but one thing that I've been working on a lot lately is sort of delving into memory and sort of the malleability of memory, and how AI can both help us recreate and reimagine memories. And sometimes also it changes those memories as we are working with it, right? Because everything you do, every time you remember or, try to, paint or in some way depict a memory, it changes the memory, right? And so when you're using these AI tools that are drawing on this collective consciousness of, the world and all of these images, that's going to paint and change how you remember that too. So it's a little bit about that and about the stories we tell ourselves. So yeah, I think there's a million ways you can work with it. I do use ChatGPT sometimes when I'm sort of having writer's block, or when I want to try different things for my prompting in AI. I've gotten really excited about newer tools to do moving images. So there's a tool called Runway where you can use text and sometimes still images and text to create short films. And I see a ton of interesting potential there for people who are interested in moving images. So yeah, that's sort of a long-winded answer, but that's sort of how I got in and sort of what I've been interested in lately.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about the mix of sort of imagined histories of impossible otherwise collaborations and our own memories, and thinking about the imagination of other people, how we combine that, and then how it fits in with our own depictions, memories, recollections, and how we reflect on things when we're being creative. I haven't really ever tried, if I wrote another poem about the same run, would it come out the same? And just from one day to the next, a different lens that one thinks about, a particular event or a particular combination with. So that's a really interesting insight. Ira, how about you in terms of thinking about, is there some particular aspect of AI? And obviously you were talking about the interesting link between generativity and the art, and generativity and the coding, and how that fits together. Was there a particular instance of AI that got you going or changed the direction of your creativity at some point?
Yeah, I mean, there was. And so in the, and a lot of what Danielle and I are referring to is this generative image AI. So though we do use things like ChatGPT and Claude 2 and things like that, most of what we're talking about is applications of things based on Stable Diffusion, which is a diffusion model that allows the AI to sort of synthesize images based on huge collections of other images and textual terms connected to that in a prompt. So not everybody always uses these tools. But for me, it's funny that the technology, the computation has always needed to connect back to a very deep, very spiritual, in a sense, connection I have with painting, right? Painting and drawing in a lot of ways. So I'd say my first sort of transcendent type of experience when I was a young person was standing in Toledo, Spain, in front of an El Greco. And I had never experienced anything like that in a synagogue or a church, but I something happened to me in front of that painting in that church that changed me, changed my course of my life, what I studied, etc. And I would say, now, even though I spend much more time with computation than I do actual painting, though I hope that balance always shifts, it's when I go and stand in front of a Piero della Francesco or a Bellini or certain paintings that I feel this deep, deep connection to this thing from the past, this presence. And so when AI started being utilized in kind of art making, image making, mostly through GANs, through these kind of adversarial networks, the work had a very strong sort of aesthetic footprint from the technology. So much so that I wasn't very interested. It was cool. It was really different, new types of eye candy to me at the time, but it didn't connect to this long history that I came from in terms of painting, drawing, or even the coding, the creative coding. It just felt more connected to things that were happening maybe in commercial art or special effects, things like that, which wasn't my practice, I was not really connecting to it. When Stable Diffusion, so really going back to only last summer, a year ago, when Stable Diffusion came out and I investigated that, I tried to keep an open mind. My earliest experiments were shocking because I fed some of my own drawings into the AI, and what I got back were variations of drawings. Some were much better than my original drawings. I fed in drawings from Piero, and there was this strange sense of time disappeared, and there was, I felt, I mean, it's kind of a crazy romantic, I felt like I was hanging out with these 14th century artists, 15th century artists now making art again, and it just changed the whole trajectory again. So that's, and I've been sort of trying to sort this out since, I think.
No, it's interesting to hear both of those, and it wasn't AI, but I think of the first tattoo I got was I went to the artist and I said, I want a representation of a 3rd century Catholic martyr, but put in 1930s Baltimore. And she envisioned that out of her own imagination, taking it from a couple of different paintings and a book on 1930s Baltimore architecture, and envisioned that. And again, it wasn't AI, but an interesting way of drawing from different eras and putting things together in a way that's completely has a very different message to what it's conveying then when you get through that. Anil, how about you? What would you have a quintessential AI experience in your creativity?
Yes, and it's also with the Stable Diffusion. So I'm part of a book club community in which sort of with the last 3 years since COVID, COVID has had many benefits. It's creating this sort of virtual communities where we are very close. And so they've been teaching us, working on virtual reality and then AI, many AI tools. So in fact, the logo for this one, if you see on the, on the logo, the left side or right side, how it shows up, right? The blue person with the sort of the buildings and the sort of golden connections hanging out as if in a card. This was created by me in Stable Diffusion when I was trying to find a logo for this conference. What will be management, spirituality, consciousness, and artificial intelligence? And it tried this, that. So I had to try. And I got this I got it. This is just like what it is. It's a person, it's gender neutral sort of, and it's got this whole business thing and the connectivity thing, and it's got the stars on the sides. So again, finding the right picture, again, it's sort of what the creativity is within. what you create out, what echoes or resonates with you depends on how expanded you are within. So to me, AI and the sort of the natural the creativity has to be kindled within. I think AI by itself creates lots of variations, but if you have no taste for it, hey, that will mean nothing. And I've been very, very bad at art. I couldn't draw if somebody put a gun to my life, but I've been a singer, I've been a dancer, I've been playing instrument, I can organize things. So my art is more of the sort of that kind of thing, not on the drawing thing. So, but this whole generative AI for Midjourney has been very helpful. ChatGPT has been very functional. It is a creative tool, but I've not used for any art thing. I say, I want this, give me 10 references. I say, organize them in table, they'll do it. It's like total Jeeves-ish thing for me. It's the Midjourney, which is really opening up beautiful thing. And every presentation I've done, I said, let me have an AI image for that. Even if I'm going to talk tomorrow about Sufism and religion, I got pictures created by Midjourney for that, whatever I'm talking about. So it's just so liberating. And you look at this image, wow. If then the next page, next chart, wow. So it's like a big wowness. Sometimes, sometimes you get really fantastic. So I guess, let me ask you, what do you think, Kevin, how does AI help you? It's the same question back to you.
I think it's interesting to think about, again, my artistic pursuits are mostly on the poetry writing side, although occasionally a little bit of drawing. I think it's more on the images. I do enjoy, just playing with images a bit in very casual photography, particularly of flowers. And so thinking about that, and as I continue to become a little more expressive in my attire at this point in my career, when I've got tenure, and I don't need to worry about how I look quite as much, thinking about how AI could have some interesting applications for experimentation in attire as well. And I think there's some very interesting things one could do with that. We've all had positive things to say about how AI can help us in our creativity. Anil, why don't I start with you and go backwards this time? Is there a threat to our creativity? Is there anything where it could take away or replace human creativity? Should we be worried about that? Or do we think it is primarily something that, when used well, is going to accentuate and enable new ways of creativity rather than taking it away?
No, as soon as you said, okay, I'm going to ask you this is the downside. Said, what is he talking about? And then within the few seconds, you complete your sentence. Said, no, there is. I could give it totally dependent on it. It's like not only just imagery, but think of songwriting or dancing moves or whatever it is. What if I just go back? My thing is, hey, I'm going to this thing, and what can I sing? And that's you give me. It's almost like you get dependent on sort of the team around you, and so that dependence would be bad. I think it's as a tool, if you're a master, that's great. I don't think it can produce bad creativity, because by definition, creativity is something new and different. It's a field, it's a social field that decides whether it's novel enough for them and it's useful enough for them, right? You can produce anything, and somebody say, oh, we've seen it before, or so you go someplace else, oh, this is something new. So it's the decision making on this thing of whether the creativity is good or bad is out there. What is important is that you don't get dependent. I think that would be a negative thing. It can be very addictive. I've seen people say, I've just worked day and night on this. Time flies for me. Time flying for you is good, so long as you also know when to take back your time and your ownership of your own self.
And it's interesting, because as we think about some of the things that we've heard throughout the day about what AI does and how the algorithms work, it's not thinking in the way that humans do. It's learning and it's using patterns, but obviously without our ideas to tell it what type of pattern we're trying to create, it's not going to create anything for us on the visual or the written side of things. Ira, how about you? Ideas or thoughts on whether it could be a threat to human creativity?
I do agree that we seem to be living in more and more addictive times, Anil. So I think this is just one more thing that we can now become addicted to. It's interesting that we are connected to a management group here, because I do think the thing that I think a lot about is the market models of abundance for scarcity, especially in the art world. This is something that it's a very destabilizing technology that right now everybody is sort of making believe that this problem doesn't exist. And so there's this forced scarcity built into the system. So the other thing that Danielle and I didn't really mention explicitly is we're extremely involved with the blockchain. Okay, as if the AI wasn't a threat enough to art, now we're involved in sort of crypto as well. And specifically, I think the things that we're most interested in, I don't want to talk for Danielle, but is really empowerment agency for artists in terms of supporting themselves, things like that, right? It's not about just getting rich. It's less about tokenomics, things like that. But there is this challenge, because when I'm creating a project now that I know I'm going to release, that I'm going to try to sell and to collectors and work with the gallery, I may generate 10,000 images in my development process, but the market says that I should drop 100 of them. So there's sufficient scarcity for collectors to resell them and exist in this old model of the art market. What happens to those other 900 pieces? Culturally, historically, I don't think it's productive to burn or destroy those, right? So there's an inherent tension that I don't think people are really discussing yet. And again, I think Danielle would be really interesting to have I'd love to talk to her more about this, because she is involved in groups that are thinking about we're helping approach some of these questions. But that's one of the threats I see, is that at some point we need to address this.
It's a really interesting thing to consider. Obviously with the ability to create almost an infinite number of images, how do you end up with a value assigned to each one, and what is the value that's being created by a particular artist when there's assistance from AI? So that's a really interesting topic. And Danielle, you can either sort of add to that discussion directly, talk about whether you think there's a threat to human creativity. Take that wherever you want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of more go off of what Ira was talking about the blockchain and AI together. I mean, they're sort of like it's like this perfect collision, right, of these two things. And I don't think there's like a threat to human creativity as such. I do think that the addictive nature of these things, is something that we all need to be watching out for ourselves and our children and humanity, right? But I do think that something that's nice about the blockchain in terms, specifically in terms of AI, because there's such a, proliferation of images, and there's more and more people using it. I do think that the fact that on the blockchain, you have this transparency, you have this clear provenance, you have a timestamp of when this artist made this piece, who it sold to, for what price, everyone can see that. I do think that helps in terms of sort of the history of art, right? Because this is going to be in art history in some way in the books, and the blockchain is going to make all of that super clear, sort of, who kind of experimented with this technique first, who were the early Medicis, right? The early supporters of this kind of work. All of that will be very clear in a way that in the traditional art world, there are researchers, museums have people, full-time PhDs called provenance researchers that that's all they do, because there's so many missing holes in the provenance of these works. So I think that that's something that's super promising, both for art history and for the artists as well, and the collectors. But yeah, I think the addictive nature both of the crypto and the blockchain and of AI are things that we need to put guardrails around somehow. I try to do it for myself with limited success.
It's interesting. I want to go a little deeper on two of the things that were mentioned. I mean, one, it's interesting to think about, if we set crypto aside for a moment and focus just on the blockchain technology, it is really interesting to think about how it does make it traceable down to the, microsecond that the piece of art was created, and the ability to track what was first, who got it. But I think what's interesting is, thinking about the type of artists who have access to that technology, is there a will it democratize it, or will it continue to make it potentially, only the ones who can afford to apply that type of technology to their work will be part of the documentation that goes into the art history, or will it be a democratizing force? And I don't know the answer to that question, but would love to know what any of the other panelists think about that.
Yeah, I mean, Danielle and I probably have a lot to say about that. But I mean, in my experience, coming very much from the traditional art world, with degrees from schools that are expensive, things like that, and knowing the gallery world, things like that, I have never seen a more inclusive, democratizing force in the arts than blockchain. So, and it's not only skill-based, so you have people that are sort of starting out, people who have been making art for 30 years, it's people from all over the world, so it crosses boundaries. I mean, the biggest problem about the addiction is people are up somewhere at some point having really interesting discussions about this stuff. But yeah, so it's been amazing. It's opened my eyes, and I feel like challenged a bunch of my own beliefs about what we think about in terms of literacy, in terms of the visual arts, and how we have to make that much more expansive. Yeah, so I think it has very positive implications.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think that, I have met more artists from around the world. I have collected art from artists from around the world in a way that I couldn't when I was in the traditional art world. Number one, a lot of those folks who are, not in major European or American cities wouldn't have been able to get my attention. Number two, it's very expensive to ship paintings around the world, right? I can collect these things with a click, and that artist gets the money right away. It doesn't go through an intermediary, right? So there are so many things, I think, that make this blockchain art world much more democratic. That said, there are hurdles and barriers to entry. Like education is a huge issue. Onboarding is sort of a term we talk about a lot in this blockchain art space, because if you aren't familiar with crypto, if you don't really know what the blockchain is and you're an artist, it is difficult to get past those things and figure out all the steps you would need to take to put work out on the blockchain and participate in this system. And I always tell people my DMs are open. I'm willing to help anyone. I came in as a person who knew nothing about this, and was lucky to have someone sort of hold my hand through it all and explain it to me. And I'm happy, and I have done that for other people. But doing that one-on-one can only, get so many folks on board. So I do think we have an education issue. But generally, for folks who are interested in technology and can get past those hurdles and sort of get the education part sorted, it does provide this vast, open community, which has been honestly life-changing for me. I mean, I've made friends, I've made connections, people that I've now met out in the real world, not just online friends, and I learn from these people. I feel a little bit like I'm back in art school. Like I'm in these chat groups with other artists, some AI artists, some coders, people doing different things, and just those conversations are so inspiring and helpful to me. And I wouldn't have had that, just here in this like small town that I live in. So I think overall it's a very democratizing space.
What I find interesting, I like the idea of, once you get beyond some of the just technical and technological hurdles, it can be a very democratizing thing. The ability to get art from people all around the world. Recently in a discussion within our place of worship about, how our place of worship happens to be one where there are no women who can speak from the pulpit, and how different it might be if women could share their views of what they read in scripture. And, it's a link just in terms of the different voices that come to the table, the different lenses that people see art through, the different ideas that they bring with their art, opens an entirely new range of literacy about art, literacy about what's motivating people, literacy about the lenses that people are seeing things through, that could, totally change how we discuss how people are being creative, what they're seeing, what their interpretations mean, if, for those who choose to be open to such things.
Yeah, 100%. And I also think beyond like sort of, diversity across the world, right? Folks from all, different countries, like to speak to the woman thing, I have met quite a few super talented women artists, many of whom are mothers like me. And I do think that, success in the traditional art world requires a lot of showing up. It's a lot of being in New York City for this thing, or going to London for that thing, and Paris for that thing. And if you have small children, that is quite difficult. So the fact that another like layer of the democracy of this space is that, it can be all virtual. Yes, we do have in-person conferences and things like that you can go to, but you don't have to. You can be part of this community, in your off hours, right? Like I make most of my art and do most of my Twitter and Instagram and whatever when my kids are in bed. Or when they're watching cartoons on the weekend. I can fit it in when I need to fit it in a way that, the sort of traditional art world like that wouldn't have been conducive to it. So I think that is, huge in terms of getting other perspectives in there as well.
It could, obviously, I totally appreciate your point about women. It's a working class. If you've got only the time to produce art, when you're home and the kids are in bed or whatever, for anyone in the working class anywhere around the world, it opens up a whole new set of avenues and things that, again, just different lenses to bring the discussion of what this art is meaning and how we can then use that to, increase our, enhance our spiritual lives, as well as, how we are productive. Anil, I haven't offered you a chance to comment on this at all.
No,
Anything else you want to say?
Thank you. Yeah, I think so. A couple of the word art collection just caught my attention when I think Danielle, you just started speaking a few minutes ago. I've just been wondering, why do people collect art? Especially now, this world, when you can spontaneously create any piece of art for yourself for a sort of period of time. Because this collection mindset is there, the same money mindset, right? You want to have more. And then at some point you have this art and you don't have time to see it. You want the next one, you want the next one. So I think it's very liberating to me, just the technology, AI, and before that, let's say even Zoom has been very liberating. But during COVID, I was able to, create a conference with now almost 100 speakers, 1,200 attendees around the world, over 3 days, something like this, and with a zero budget. I just used a university Zoom license and everything was great. The only time, so that's an art form. I think organizing an event like this to me is an art form. What you're doing, interviewing, is an art form. Can ChatGPT help in, or AI can help in the questioning or the styling, or I think it's possible. So other point I would say is because the spontaneity, that truly I think we are unbounded, right? Again, with this whole transcendental perspective, we are zero, nothing, we are empty, or we also infinite. So we can just express infinitely. So if we feel that truly the infinite quality of ourselves, I think this collection mindset, I think that should go. I'm hoping the technology can create that, not democratizing, but liberating effect. Any comments on that? Maybe Danielle, since you brought up the art collection.
Yeah, I'll respond to that. I totally see what you're saying. And I think there definitely are collectors that it's about accumulation. It's about profit taking. My collecting is really more comes from a place of wanting to support fellow artists and basically, seeing potential in them and knowing that if I buy their art, that hopefully allows them to keep on going. So, I guess there are other models for that, but for now, this is what we've got. And with the blockchain and NFTs, it makes it very easy to support fellow artists, to amplify and highlight voices that maybe aren't as heard. When I collect, even if I don't collect something, I'm often, tweeting out, hey, I found this artist. I think their art's amazing. Check them out. Here's their, profile. Trying to get eyes on folks who I think are doing interesting things, and I want them to keep going. So, but yeah, for sure, the NFT space has a lot of, profit-minded folks. I mean, because it has a lot of crypto native folks, and that's kind of, that's what they're coming from. But there is certainly a community, particularly of artists. It's a real artist supporting artists community that I'm a part of anyway, where we all are sort of buying each other's art and, supporting each other and happy for each other's successes, which for sure is something I didn't see a lot of in the traditional art world. It was a lot more sharp elbows and, it's a limited pie and you can't have any because I want it all. So yeah, I think there are different ways to look at that. Ira, do you have any thoughts on collecting?
Yeah, no, I have two thoughts. One is I think the collecting that Danielle's referring to, I think is closer more to a barter system. First of all, the price per tokens tend to be very affordable. So you may spend 5 to 25 TES, which is at this point less than $1. It would be $5 to less than $25 for a piece of art. Which in the traditional art world is, you can't buy the catalog usually for that price, right? So it's very affordable. People are buying one another's work, supporting one another, and I think that's the spirit in general. I think there's another type of collecting though, which is, I aspire to do this professionally, right? As much as I've loved my 25, 30 years in the academy, I'm happy to kind of move on, and if I could support myself through the sale of my work at this point in my life, I would jump at it. So I do think there's still a case for artists who want to do this professionally to support themselves through collectors. And so I really value that part of the dynamic here. I think there's still a lot there's still a lot of BS in this space. There's a lot of kind of superficial speculation. I think the traditional art world, the kind of the good players who have been supporting artists for many, many decades with their galleries are trying to figure out how to navigate this. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I do think there's a real important place still for collection.
It's interesting. I mean, my wife and I are not collectors in any serious sense of the word, but as we become empty nesters, one thing we're spending a lot of time doing is going to art shows, whether they're outdoors, indoors, big city on the East Coast, sometimes very small towns, but with big art programs like State College, Pennsylvania, where Penn State is. But, the pieces that I buy, it's not a huge number, but the pieces that I buy are because something is still speaking to me about that piece. And, that connection, as we talk about in the spirituality, to something bigger and some meaning from it. And my ability to have that and have that close at hand, and even I mentioned the tattoo earlier. I mean, I have two same artists. The reason I went back to the same artist in terms of supporting, her work, and again, really thinking about having something that is meaningful and that carries that meaning and reminds me of that meaning on a daily basis. I think that's, part of the reason for collecting. I want to ask one more question and then open things up to other attendees if there are other questions. We've all talked about things that we like to do creatively. We all have had or have jobs in the real world with organizations that are paying the bills. And how can any insights that any of us have on how organizations can use AI to help their employees become more creative in ways that are beneficial to the workplace. So this is even aside from artistic, just we need to be creative to come up with new and novel ideas in the workplace. And again, we could talk about ChatGPT all day in terms of just helping to increase productivity, but that's not really necessarily on the creative side. Just any insights that people might have. And Anil, why don't we start with you for this one? Any thoughts that you have about how organizations can make this work?
Right. I think meditation is the way. Inner liberation is the way to make you creative, because to the extent creativity is a person, of course, the creative process, AI can help. Creative product, you have an ecosystem like buyers, who appreciate your work. But if you think of making people creative, individually, then of course you do meditation, sort of clear away the cobwebs of judging yourself. This is not good enough. This is not good enough. Hey, let the other guys tell you it's not good enough. Why do you keep telling yourself it's not good enough? But at the process level of creativity, I think AI is great. AI can help start sharing. You can have community serve, can have respond in real time to, hey, can you tweak this? And suddenly you have a product which everybody says we all did it and nobody did it, kind of happens. So I think AI can be a fantastic tool for collaboration and creative collaboration. And but I think that if you unpack creativity at the level of person, process, and product, AI can help with, I think, the first middle one, the process. Product
Right.
obviously depends on the community and the sharing and the ecosystem and blockchain and whatever sort of the ecosystem is there.
I like that insight about process. Danielle, so you've got an MBA. How would you think about using AI to help a team or an organization, increase creativity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the point about collaboration is a really good one. I've done a couple of collaborations with other artists. One was a fellow AI artist. The other one is in process, and she's a coder. She's a generative artist, doesn't use AI. And I think working with someone who comes from a different background and, sort of incorporating AI and sort of showing her what the AI can do with some of her code-based outputs. I mean, it's just like generating all of these ideas in both of us. So beyond the project we're working on, I think it's given us both like lots of creative inspiration for other things we might want to do. So that's obviously an art-based project, but I think that companies can apply that to all kinds of projects, right? And have teams and groups of people use AI to help them, collaborate and kind of brainstorm a bit more creatively. I think one thing that I've found it helpful for is brainstorming and coming up with things when I feel a bit stuck or I've got an idea, but I don't know quite, what I'm getting at or the language. Like AI can't magically give me that, but sometimes it'll give me a phrase or it'll give me a word or it'll give me an image that is like the kernel of something. So I think that companies can use that as well.
That's a great observation on the collaboration and the brainstorming, and just it can be a prompt. It's not the end product, but it can be a prompt to help you move along the way. And Ira, how about you?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And I've been having a million thoughts while I've been listening to everyone speak. But I've taught sort of raw creativity in the classroom for many, many years, an intro drawing class, an intro painting, even an intro creative coding class. And there's always lots of challenges. One of the big challenges is the programming that we all receive I mostly know this Western culture of being really careful about looking before we leap, right? Being careful about analyzing and trying not to look stupid or foolish, trying to be productive, really focusing on that kind of gestalt function of the brain for efficiency. And we've perfected it at this point in our culture, right? And when you're trying to teach drawing, it goes back to what Neil was saying about meditation. It's about just being completely in that moment and seeing things as if you were literally born a moment ago, and you don't have a sense of a hand or a foot. It's just all the data. You're just basically seeing the raw data. And that's terrifying for people to learn to do in a class. I used to joke that my students would rather go skydiving than sit in the center of a town square and ask people to draw their portraits, right? Because there's so much shame involved in this process. So the greatest thing I think that is happening with AI right now, especially generative AI, the art part of it, is that more people are making art. The more people that make art, the more that it really makes society healthier, in my opinion. Literacy, that kind of visual literacy, which I think spreads to a much more holistic type of healthy literacy or health, it just takes experience, right? If you just do more of it, you will get better at it. You will be more holistic, right? You'll be healthier. So I think that it removes the skill anxiety and the shame, right? Which I think is great. So if I ask people to draw something, it's scary, but if I say just prompt, so, but on the other hand, I'm seeing other things happening in the academy, which is no real surprise. This threat of AI, people worrying about games, having their papers being written by ChatGPT instead of the students, and then all these anxieties. And I'm seeing all the policies that are going to be formed and all the negative stuff that you can imagine organizations that are really good at putting these layers of control on. I would just encourage people that are using things like ChatGPT to not focus always on the outcome, but just to focus on the process. And that little spin can take. It's this, why are the students using this? It's not the problem that they're using the ChatGPT to deliver their papers. Why are they doing it? I think if we can kind of challenge why they're doing it, it will sort of fix the problem. So I don't mean to preach on this, but it's such an important question.
No, I like that insight. And there was a bit of discussion earlier in the day as part of the colloquium to think about, trying to tell students not to use ChatGPT is like 20 years ago trying to tell students not to use calculators in math class. It's going to be used. And so instead, let's think about ways to use it to our benefit and to again, accentuate the creativity. And there's a comment in the chat on Zoom about one of the elements killing creativity is fear, which we heard, comments on that from several of our panelists. And certainly I can even say that. I mean, I've dabbled in piano playing and a little bit of music and again, photography, but I've got one son who was a conservatory French horn major and who makes money playing piano, and another son who was a student at the local art college here in Baltimore City. And so I look at their work and I'm like, why do I even bother trying? And yet the flip side of that, to both of points from several of our panelists, is but there's no reason not to make art because it is part of the expression and it is part of the self-care that we need to have regardless of the quality, because it's a part of being who we are. We do have an interesting question from Larry Ebert in the chat. Any thoughts on IP ownership of original non-AI derivative work? And does IP interrelate to the ability for artists to make a living in an AI world? And I'll throw that open to, and you want to elaborate on that, Larry?
Yeah, if I can just add one piece to that based on some recent remarks. So we've been talking a lot about visual art, and I've been thinking a lot about writers, and we have the writing strike and the SAG strike, actors strike in Hollywood in the US. And so I guess I'm pushing back just a little bit on the notion that of democratization and more people are doing art. I wonder, at least in the example of writing, because ChatGPT is so good at it. We all see this in its ability to write marketing content or newsletters for us or screenplays or, just about everything. Is that really going to increase the number of writers or decrease? And then I want to connect that back. The original question was actually about intellectual property. Of course, we've all read about these concerns. I'm a professional musician as well as a teacher in the business school, and I'm not personally that concerned, but I understand those who are concerned about their original works being used without their permission or not having rights to them. So when we move through that discussion about the threats of AI, I just want to make sure that gets discussed or included at some point. Curious your thoughts. And by the way, this is excellent. This whole conference is great, but thank you very much to the panelists. That was a long question.
I'll touch on the thing about writers because my husband is a writer. He writes memoirs, nonfiction. He's written some of his own sort of history books, but he makes his bread and butter through ghostwriting. So writing biographies and memoirs for various famous people. And he has tried a couple times to use ChatGPT to do things that sort of take a long time for him. And, okay, maybe I can save time by seeing if ChatGPT can do this. So like an example is like, if he's writing a book about someone from South Africa and he needs to an expository paragraph about apartheid, like, okay, ChatGPT, give me that. And he has found it totally not usable. So maybe it will get more usable, to his standards, but I do think that similar to with visual art, you need someone to direct the AI. You need a concept, a narrative, sort of a person who's lived in the world and had experiences and has emotions to tell this machine sort of what to do and what you want. I think it's similar with ChatGPT. ChatGPT, as far as I can tell, doesn't do well with humor, doesn't do well with nuance or subtlety. Again, that might change over time as it gets trained better and better, but I do still think a good writer, particularly a creative writer, or someone who has a niche that they're very skilled in and is attuned to the human condition in a way that the AI isn't, is still going to have value. My husband still has lots of work coming his way, so that said, I'm sure there are folks who will. You were mentioning sort of marketing copy and things like that. I think that obviously is going to cost some jobs for sure. But I am very skeptical that AI on its own, without a human collaborator, will ever write a great novel. Like, to me, I maybe, but I'll believe it when I see it. I love fiction. I'm a big reader. And so far, whenever I've used ChatGPT, like it's very ChatGPT. Like, I have to take it and make it mine. And usually I throw out 95% of what it gives me, and I like keep a phrase or two. So, that's a long-winded answer, but I do think there is still value to that human aspect, right? And with art, I think it's there's no way that the AI is ever going to have its own ideas and like its own intentionality in the way that a human artist does, right? So things might get auto-made, but will they be meaningful? Will they resonate with humans? Probably not. So that's my thought. Or anyone else? What do you think?
I'll just add to that. I know, even looking at like some sample essays that were generated, as we were talking about it in an academic context, paragraph by paragraph, maybe there was some coherence within the paragraph. Thus, you could have marketing copy that would be generated by this. But going beyond one paragraph and trying to get a coherent whole, to have AI try to write a 22-minute sitcom episode. Probably not, because something is going to get lost in translation and some transition isn't going to be quite right. Whereas, again, to write one paragraph, maybe. And I think that's where the AI that I've observed thus far isn't going to cut it in terms of, replacing humans for doing most of this stuff. But I'd certainly open it up to others on the panel.
I think it's good to ask what's possible now and what could be possible with a kind of more of a maximalist perspective, where these things are perfected, and just in terms of intellectually thinking about that, right? So, if you were making drawings in 1845, 1850, and your main goal was to represent motifs as accurately as possible, so people could collect them on their travels, to have a recording of that space, your job was probably at risk, right? Because that function was going to be taken over by the camera. If your job was to interpret it through your own really unique personal history, probably not really as much at risk, right? Because the camera wasn't gonna get that. So on one hand, we have a lot of precedent for very disruptive technologies coming in and displacing groups. There's people that still make very, very photorealistic paintings today, and some of them support themselves, sell these sorts of things. So it does seem like there is room for lots of different things. And I had another thought here, though, on the AI with but yeah, I kind of lost the other part. What was the original question? Was about the IP, because I didn't want to. It was something I really was excited to say.
Sure,
I'll come back.
I was asking about the role of that in the artist's ability to maintain ownership and control of their original work and to make a living. What's the impact of AI on making a living for the various arts?
Yeah, no, I know. Thank you very much for that. In terms of making a living, and I don't mean to be crass, I've never made more money selling art than I have since this all started, right? So I can't see this has been a negative thing for me personally. But my thought was this: is that even in the 20th century, we went from valuing the craft of drawing and painting to the craft of idea, right? So Marcel Duchamp comes in, and now we might sell, or someone might collect or value an idea or a gesture, a banana on the wall, more than somebody spending 1,000 hours on a drawing, right? So it would almost say that no matter how good AI gets, that may not be ultimately what we value, right? So yeah.
I also will add, I do think as our world becomes increasingly digital, right? We're always on these screens. I do think that there is going to be, and I can already see it with a lot of collectors, you know, a new value put on handmade and tactile things, and that isn't something that will go away. You know, as much as I see and collect and am involved in digital art, I still adore going to art museums and seeing things in person. I still have art on the walls of my home. You know, I still, you know, love to, see real fashion and wear real clothes and not just like things in the metaverse, right? Although that's very cool. So I don't think that stuff will go away. And I think that for artists to survive and make a living, they may just need to stay abreast of these tools. Like they may not wind up using them in their practice, or they may wind up using some aspect of them. But I think ignoring it or just having a sort of anti-stance probably isn't the way to go. I think understanding it and seeing that it's as something that might be able to enhance your practice or complement your practice is maybe, you know, a sort of more future leaning way to be. But yeah, I don't think physical art and physical objects will go away. I surely hope not.
Do you think, you know, Danielle, you made me think about, I'm sorry to just interrupt here, but you made me think about the idea of conservation, right? We live in a time where we're obsessed with preserving, conserving, going back in history and finding evidence. And the idea of like going from the ancient Rome to Rome and losing all and having to refine that just seems like we never want that to happen again, right? But it may prove to be really valuable that conservation becomes about a selective destruction. That this may not be a sustainable model of just conservation and preservation.
Yeah, totally. I mean, not all of this stuff will last, right? Either because technology or disasters, but also because there are some things that we will, as a society, not value as much, right? So, yeah, I think that's a really interesting point.
May I? Thank you. May I just ask Lee and Chris, or Chris and Lee, that whichever, since you posted comment each, can you just talk about it briefly, or?
Well, just my comment had to do with the speed at which things appear to be moving with not just large language models, but artificial general intelligence, which seems to me it may never be human the way we think of who we are as humans, but it'll be able to replicate things in the artistic domain to such an extent that we humans will respond to what it produces in ways that we respond to the very best art produced by the very greatest artists. And you know, I'm doing a panel tomorrow on artificial intelligence and human consciousness, which I think is in some ways more difficult thing to, not more difficult, but I think, you know, whether artificial intelligence will ever achieve what we humans consider to be consciousness, you know, beyond sentience, but actually consciousness with that level of self-awareness is maybe a very interesting and maybe unknowable at this stage. But frankly, you know, I think if there are two scenarios that I imagine for AGIs producing art creatively in the future. One is that there'll be so much of it that it'll be devalued because we get so exposed to such an extraordinary range of art, and maybe AGIs will figure out for each person based on their own past history what exactly they consider to be the most aesthetic and beautiful. But the other is that they're even smarter than that, and they'll know that they have to create artificial scarcity. And so they won't produce as much art as they could, because then they know it would be devalued. So that's just some reflections, not very studied reflections, but off the cuff. Thank you.
Chris, have you thought about the idea of artificial stupidity or artificial neuroses?
Are you referring to my family?
No, I'm referring to we're so focused
No,
on
I'm kidding.
artificial,
That was a silly comment.
but artificial intelligence. But really, if we want to really approximate humans, we should be focused more on probably artificial neuroses or stupidity, more on our limitations, not our supposed intelligence.
I don't understand the question. No, seriously, could you restate that? I mean, I don't understand what you're getting at.
Yeah, it's that the thing that makes us human are really the errors and limitations, I think.
Oh, right.
But yet we focus on this romantic perfection model, right? So.
Okay, that's a good thing. I got to think about that one. Thank you.
That's a very beautiful point, Ira, because you always think in terms of human as the glowing thing, and then AI bring the glowing thing, but where is the sort of real life messiness of the physical, bodily, embedded emotional confusion, bittersweet things, all of that sort of the totality, complementarity of opposites coexisting. I think that's where maybe that's what AI may or may not be able to do, replicate the messiness of the real human being. Anyway, let's hear from
Lee,
Lee.
you have a comment. Yep.
Yeah, so to respond to that, the question that you were just raising about neuroses. So I think it's interesting to look at it in terms of the more general issue of AI errors, which are just, we've discussed here and other places extensively. And so if we think about human neuroses, as I understand it, at least the kind of psychological theory that I see, it comes from upbringing particularly, and to some degree from genetics. And so it seems to me that those are analogous for AI. So the genetics are what it's being trained on, and the upbringing is how it's trained. And it raises the issue, which for me is fundamental, about consciousness. Are they really different than us?
That's an interesting one to ponder. Not sure that any of us have an answer for that one, but it is interesting, as you point out, because the AI is being trained on things that are made by humans, and those reflect our neuroses and our fears and everything else about us. What's interesting is how, again, as part of getting back to the democratization comment earlier, as more individuals from places where there wasn't things that were in the set that AI was trained on originally, but are now able to produce things, how does that expand even what AI can do to include a much broader set of human experiences that are then put into the library of things that it has access to?
Yeah, I'll add a quick anecdote on that note. Anecdote's maybe not the right word. Anyway, AI text-to-image models are sort of notoriously, they reflect a lot of the biases in our society, and they have a very tough time accurately and flatteringly depicting people of color. If you type in pretty girl, you will almost always get a thin young white woman, for example. And there was a wonderful exhibition curated by an artist who I love. Her name's Linda Dunia. She brought together a number of different, I think they were all Black artists, and had them sort of explore this concept and play with it in AI, therefore also training the AI better. It was called Invisible, and all of the artists sort of produced bodies of work that reflected on the body and beauty and these different things. And I do think that as more people from diverse backgrounds, more artists who maybe aren't represented well in that data set are using these tools, it will get better. But it's certainly something that a number of artists are already focusing on as part of their practice, sort of exploiting those issues that exist within the current models and data sets.
It
Yeah.
also, it also
Observation,
troubles me a
yeah.
bit that
1
if
second.
instead of our,
Yeah.
instead of our current group, that if we were a group of Trump supporting Republicans, would we really be concerned about the same described errors?
Right.
Well, that's interesting. One person's correctness is another person's error, right? Like the terrorist on the side is the freedom fighter on the other side. And in fact, Danielle, I just wanted to make this comment that in the previous session, we had this AI and DEI, and diversity and inclusion. And one of the women presenters was, her thing was faces and races. This whole thing that AI is very bad with, faces of color. And in fact, they said that even the AI was not able to recognize Oprah and Michelle Obama, and was perfectly happy to recognize faces with 1% inaccuracy, 1% error, any white male versus African American female, like amazing difference. So yeah, those biases are very much there. Let me hear from Shaheen. He's been commenting quite profusely. Any thoughts? And then maybe Richard also. Richard, yeah. Shaheen, do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm a PhD student at at University of Maryland. I actually doing research on AI and literacy. So this session has been wonderful. Thank you so much. So I want to talk something that, machines have the intelligence that we have given them, right? They do not know anything more than we have not given them. If you ask anything to ChatGPT, what is happening today, ChatGPT will say that, hey, my knowledge is up to limited to 2021, right? I do not know more than that. So the question is that, consciousness, AI consciousness, we even cannot define what consciousness is. So I would argue that in near future, we won't be able to develop a conscious AI. I don't think that is possible. So we do not need to be afraid of AI. It's not anything that is going to change things radically. We just will adapt, we adapted with many technologies before, and this is something new. That's why it is exciting us, or we are getting excited. Sometimes fear is coming, but I would tell that there is nothing to fear. It's cool. We just need to learn. And who are using AI, right? Expert humans like us, like you. I'm just a beginning. So yeah, we would grow with AI. More people would be using, and we'll know that this text being generated by AI. So I don't think that AI is a problem. I think it is a great tool to develop our productivity and go beyond and reach to our maximum potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, do you want to share something? No. Okay. Anybody else who have not heard from Terry or Jyoti? Some of the people I know, but anybody else wants to share any perspective? First of all, thank you everybody for a great discussion.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Corinne, you've been on camera. If you have any comments, I like to recognize people who actually do show up on camera when they're for these.
Thank you, but I'm sort of embarrassed because I forgot it was Eastern Standard Time and not my Central Standard Time, so I was an hour late. I'm very sorry for that, because when I came in, it was so rich and dynamic. So I'm just gonna say I'm sorry I missed the hour, but thank you.
Well, I know Anil has been recording it, so it'll probably be available at some point to reflect on. I just want to say thank you to our, Jerry, go right ahead, and then I'll close after you.
Yeah, I've been listening to the discussion, and admittedly, I don't know that much about like fine art or anything, but I did when I'm hearing the discussion about consciousness and can AI ever become conscious, I have the thought about spirit, the spirituality, and talking about the spirit or the soul. Is that the same thing as consciousness, or are they two different things? I think you can develop consciousness, at least from what I'm understanding. You can use AI to develop some kind of consciousness, but is that the same thing as having a soul? And so, and I think a lot of art has, but
come to the panel, come to Tom Collins' panel tomorrow.
Oh, I'm going to, but that was one of the questions I had.
The
And
secrets,
the
the secrets
other
of the
point,
universe will be revealed to you tomorrow.
yeah,
sir.
I'm sure. The other point is that, you know, two things can be true at the same time, which is, yes, AI could be a great tool and there can also be problems with it. And so it's a little disturbing when if you think it's either this or that. I mean, you have to be able to hold both things at the same point, at the same time. And I especially think that's true with the whole idea of, at least my understanding, that it doesn't work very well with any kind of diversity, especially with the color of skin and that kind of thing.
Maybe ask Joan. Joan, you had the panel last time. Are you around? Joan, are you there? Maybe she's not. Anyway, so she was on the she was running the panel last time, which was on the DEI, so that you were there, Kevin.
Yes,
Okay.
I just wanted to draw to a conclusion. We've heard very interesting things about obviously AI and art, AI and creativity more generally, the ability to help with process, the ability to help with brainstorming, but still that need for basic human consciousness as a guide in order to actually create the end product, and really getting back to Anil's view of the importance of separating the process from the product and where AI can be helpful to us. I definitely want to thank our two guests to the panel, especially because they both agreed to do this in less than 2 weeks with notice, and it's always a challenge to get people to schedule. You've certainly added to the discussion and given us lots to think about, and I just wanted to once again say thank you.
And thank
Thanks
you
for
all.
Having me. This was a great talk. I really enjoyed it.
If you
Great,
could
and
just,
Anil, what's
thank
up
you.
next?
yeah, take a moment if you can put in feedback. Just in the panel just helps to get feedback for us also. The next thing is in about half hour, I'm going to run a tutorial on ChatGPT and Midjourney, Stable Diffusion. And anybody, you're most welcome to join. In fact, you might just help make it enrich. If you're very good at it, then you can do. I have sort of basic capabilities which I would share, and we'll just make art together. So maybe you'll go out richer. If an art is worth $1 or $2, maybe you'll walk out with a few dollars worth of stuff to your heart's content. So that's coming up at 7 Eastern.
Great.
Thank you, Kevin. That was a great format. And so no charts. I had charts ready, but Kevin told me yesterday, oh, no need for charts. We'll have discussion. Thank you very much, Danielle. Thank you, Ira. Thank you, everybody. Say you can stay on, or you can everybody can drop off. We will reconvene in about 30 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. I have
Thank
to go
you.
make dinner for